I've been looking forward to talking to my next guest here as this night has gone on. Professor Paul Gronke. He teaches political science at Reed College, but he's considered one of the nation's foremost experts when it comes to early voting and voting integrity. Okay, so here's my question, Professor. I know how the bucket of votes, we know 102 plus million votes were cast before today even started, before the day of voting. And I knew from a basic metric standpoint that about 2/3 of those votes were mail-in votes and the balance were roughly in-person voting. I also know of the mail-in voting, from a registration standpoint, if not 2/3, 60-40 or thereabouts were Democrat registered Republican. Are we going to be able to know with clarity of the people who mailed in the ballots? There only can be three things that happen. One is they mailed it and they've tabulated it. Two is I got cold feet and I worried my ballot wasn't going to get there, so I voted in person instead. Or three, I sent it in, but I don't know what happened to it. Can we clarify that third bucket as to how many votes we have not tabulated? Is that going to be possible state by state?
It should be possible. How many we're not tabulated? I mean, that third bucket, that bucket has still not been emptied yet, right? I mean, the bucket's full and overflowing in Philadelphia County and in Allegheny County and Harrisburg. And, they're not going to be even opening up that Pandora's box, perhaps we should call, until, tomorrow at some point. I think some of those buckets, there may not be enough of those votes remaining for Joe Biden. I've been looking at the results in some respects thus far, and you already were just talking about this a few minutes ago. In North Carolina, Biden underperformed there. He underperformed in some areas in southern Florida, quite surprisingly. And, there's not many of those votes left. I think where we have a lot of those left are in Michigan, as we just heard, Michigan, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And some of those have already been counted if they came in a number of states. But not those states. Those states, they're only beginning to dig through those now. I think where things have been a little bit uncertain for folks, or kind of whipsawed, is the unevenness of the count. So that count in Florida, the way that they process them in sequence, is that what we saw first in Florida were those absentee by mail ballots and the sort of heavy Democratic turnout. But it looks like the Trump campaign was right when they were talking about their ground game, that they had people on the ground, that they thought there was going to be a lot of in-person turnout in Florida, for example. And looks like their voters, the Trump voters, are coming through in some of these areas.
So let's do, if we could, Professor, what seems to be the leans. And I'm going to make suppositions, as they say, facts not in evidence, but Arizona and Minnesota right now look to be very strong Biden leans. So if you put them in the blue column for this conversation, and if you, as you said, Ohio looks to be a given, Texas also probably, right? And also North Carolina. Those are for President Trump. Do you have any hesitation saying that Texas or North Carolina at this point, the way the districts have reported, et cetera, they're probably going to be Trump's, right?
I'm looking at my map as well, and I've got them coded for Trump. Biden is underperforming in Hispanic areas. We're going to be, up late tonight and tomorrow decomposing what happened there, or, on the reverse side, what Trump did well with those audiences. But Southern Texas is not coming in heavily for Joe Biden as people anticipated might, though Texas was going to be a reach. I think, again, Florida was the one that surprised me. How, he's underperforming Hillary Clinton in Florida by 10 points. That's a lot of votes that he really counted on.
Particularly if we would, how well he did in Hillsborough and in Pinellas County, et cetera. We can also, in the postmortem, try and figure out where the heck the money of Bloomberg went here in the canvassing and the getting out the votes specifically for these areas. But before I even get to the postmortem.
Exactly. I agree with you. If you've got North Carolina, if you've got the coding that I've got, we're on the same page here. My current count, how are you putting Arizona's blue, right? It looks like my current estimates are 235 for Trump and 253 for Biden. And I've got Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania still undecided. How are you doing Michigan? I mean, that's
But that's
I'm
the
showing
unknown
that,
because
but
we don't, as I understand it, and you've been following district by district close, you have a big part of Detroit that hasn't come in yet.
yeah, it's
And you
okay.
got Wayne County. So, yeah,
Okay. Well,
I'm
hey,
with you.
I haven't counted Alaska yet. Let me
Yeah.
get that one. I think that's going to go Trump, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. They're
They
not
also
48
will then go
states.
Biden. So, yeah, throw that one in.
Okay, good. So we're up to about 241, 238. Is that what you got, sir?
You and I are in the same ballpark. So here's my question, and this is the nightmare scenario. I guess the nightmare is 269, 269. But my point is, we came back to the Rust Belt, okay? And now you got Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think Minnesota, you got a 9-point VIG right now, almost 10 points, and they've got more than 2/3 of the electorate in. So I think Minnesota you can put in the Biden camp, but just for conversation. So those 3 states, and I'm only asking in the context of faith that we're going to get the real number. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Do you feel comfortable the way the systems are set up that the ballots that should have been counted will be counted, and even if we miss tiny on the margin, it's not going to change the number in the main?
So my concern is for Pennsylvania. I think that's where a lot of people are looking. I think a lot of, in a different day and age, we'd be talking about Learjets being firing up, but right, I mean, what's the word we want to use here? In New York and Washington and a lot of areas, they're firing up the limousines or however, lawyers are getting ready to arrive on both sides. I believe that the Michigan, the Secretary of State there, Jocelyn Benson, has pulled that state together. I think in Wisconsin, the sense that I'm hearing from folks on the ground there, academics, others, is that the clerks there are on top of their game, even though there are 1,500 of them. But in Pennsylvania, it's a very new system. They're already separating out the ballots in case there's a court decision about how they can count those ballots that are postmarked but have not arrived. And so it's very possible we'll be fighting over every single one of those ballots and every single one of those signatures for the next week. So there's where I think where the concern is going to be in Pennsylvania, big sprawling state, as you know. Some say it's Midwest, some say it's East Coast. It's the middle of it is Northern Kentucky. It's a complicated place.
But what I'm confused about is still, and you've studied this, is it that the ballots will be contested for their legitimacy, or that we don't even know how many ballots? Are we going to be looking at the envelopes and saying, do we count this or not because it's past the deadline? Or are we going to be, where is the ballot? What are you more concerned about? The actual existence of it, or how the courts will rule as to whether or not there's efficacy to count it?
Boy, I hope we're not in a situation where we're finding boxes of ballots and there's delivery issues. There have been some court orders issued in other states for the USPS to make sure that everything is cleared out. I hope the USPS gets the job done and has the labor force in place to make sure that, and identifies the election mail to get everything to election officials. If it's in the election offices, yes, it may come down to smudged postmarks or lack of postmarks that cannot be read. And someone needs to decide how you're going to evaluate those postmarked ballots. To then you opening up the ballots and there are mismarks, or somebody X'd out one and circled another oval, and those have to be disputed. They don't have the history in place in these states as they do in the states that have been doing this for a while, where they've worked through these disputes in the past and they've resolved the procedures. They're working with them this year. So yeah, that'll be tough. We'll be maybe going down to ballot by ballot fight. Again, I hope we're not in that situation, but we could be.
I can't believe I'm saying the words, but follow Florida's lead in that, my gosh, they've been counting them for a month when they come in, and they've got apparently, a cadre of people from both political parties and a neutral observer. And if there's a problem, they'll go back to the actual elector. They'll go to the voter and say, what was your intention here? We have some good, Mike, it doesn't sound, Paul, like this is rocket science, what we're coming up with. And we knew Pennsylvania was going to be not just a battleground, but possibly the decider. The candidates knew it. They were all there. But yet here we are potentially recreating the wheel 20 years later, instead of hanging chads talking about, smudge things in the deadline in a pandemic. And I'm sorry, I'm going to let my personal animus come in here. We got a pandemic going on, and now we're questioning as to whether or not somebody who postmarked the ballot on time, because the post office, who decided in their wisdom to cut back on people and services, it didn't get to where it needed to. I don't know. Something's rotten in Denmark a little bit.
Significant portion of mail that simply does not get a clear postmark because it hasn't had this sort of critical feature. So exactly, 6 months ago, I was being asked, should the whole country go to universal ballot delivery, Oregon's vote by mail system? And I was not the only one. Amber McReynolds, the head of the National Vote at Home Institute, was cautioning, look, moving to these systems quickly can be difficult and problematic. Many of us have been working and lobbying state legislators and governors, courts to try to relax these regulations in this emergency situation and provide for these kinds of procedures. Michigan made a move to at least allow those LEOs, those local election officials, to begin to open those ballots on the morning of Election Day. That was a major accomplishment, but absolutely, it's hard to move this quickly. It's very hard. And something like absentee ballots, there are humans out there, human beings with this paper. And, this is what we've gotten good practice to in many states. But, boy, you folks on the East Coast, you're new to this. Welcome.
And Paul, I want to bring in Congressman Chris Shays here, who's with me. I had a question for you.
As an elected official for 34 years, why should I be troubled that it might take 2 or 3 days to count all the ballots? And why would we want them to rush through on Election Day to count these ballots? What matters is that every night they're secure, locked up, and protected. But I want a careful count, not a rush count. So one, why should I be concerned? The second question I want to ask you is, I am stunned that the pollsters could be so wrong about this election again. And I'm particularly about the Latino vote. And I'm just curious, that's not maybe your primary interest, but I'd love you to talk about the polling as well as what I said first.
Absolutely, Congressman. Listen, one of the reasons there are pressures to get results on election night are, well, folks like you that want the results, and certainly not you, I'm sure, but others are pressuring election officials. Election officials themselves are elected officials. Sometimes you have media actors that are wanting to call it to kind of, beat everyone else to the punch. So listen, we're used to slow counts in these vote by mail states. California typically does not have results for a day or two. Washington state, sometimes it's a week. And, the world hasn't ended. Those political systems seem to function just fine, as many systems do, waiting a little while for the results. So, there's a sense of immediacy in the United States. We want our stuff now. I think a little bit of patience would do us good in many ways, in many of our lives, our social and political lives, as well as waiting for election results. I do hope that President Trump does not try to declare victory too soon. We've heard some suggestions that he won't. I hope that he decides to go to bed for the night. It's unlikely, but I hope we don't get early results. Listen, it's 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. Still a lot of time for people to hop into their trucks and protest and create trouble. We don't want that to happen. So I hope everyone can calm down, slow things down. There's no reason. And I do think that election officials, certainly secretaries of state, some Republicans, mostly Democrats, have spoken out quite forcefully to give our locals time. Congressman, I'm glad to hear you say that. It's so very important that we give our local officials the time and space to count these ballots accurately. The polls, yeah, that's a tough one. I can tell you what we learned in 2016, or what the polling industry learned, which was that it's a little bit down in the weeds, but the way to the way to explain it to someone without mathematical sophistication is they undercounted non-college educated white voters in a couple key states. It was enough that they didn't have the right margin. The polls predicted the national vote totals very accurately for Hillary Clinton, but they undercounted in a couple key states. I don't know how they missed the Latino vote so badly. I really don't. Particularly on Biden's side, they have some of the national experts on understanding the Latino electorate, but whether it was a turnout issue, lack of enthusiasm, I speculated on the call when I got approached beyond tonight. I said, was it really that thing about Biden being a puppet of Castro that seems silly to me since Castro passed away? Nonetheless, something went on in southern Florida and southern Texas, Trump may be appealing to some of the Latino. I've always thought that the Republicans had a way to appeal to the Latino electorate if they can get beyond some of their immigration policies. Perhaps we're seeing some signs of that. I don't know, Congressman. I think you might have your ear to the ground closer than me on that one.
I will mention, Paul, what's
Thank
interesting
you.
is I've been taking phone calls all night, and the amount of people in the blurbs in my screening that use the word socialist as to why they're supporting Trump and against Biden. And again, while we know in this conversation, Biden's never been confused with the socialist, it's stuck. And certainly if you were from Cuba or for certain parts of Latin or Central America, the term socialist has a different connotation as well. Maybe that wasn't effective who knows? We have time for the postmortems after. I'm sure they're already doing some soul searching, but yeah.
I saw a report that young Latinos may be trending a bit conservative, not so much on the Castro issue anymore, but just sort of on economic growth and jobs, which is, an area prior to the pandemic, which is going to be a Trump advantage. So maybe there's some discounting of the pandemic in Florida, and the sense that we really want to turn around this economy. It's got to be slowing way down there. They're so reliant on imports. They're so reliant on tourism that they got to be hurting down there.
Definitely. Well, Paul, thank you.
You're terrific. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about terrific. Let's not go that far.
No, he's sharp.
Yeah, no, he's sharp. Well,
see.
at least Oregon followed the way it was supposed to go tonight, so we'll see. What's your guess, by the way? I'm going to hold you to this, by the way. When do we find out who's the next president?
48 hours, Congressman? What do you think? 48? Can everyone calm down for 48 hours?
No, definitely not. But do you think it'll be 48 hours?
I think it'll be around that. That's 48 hours is 2 days.
Well done. Man,
Hey,
the math
listen,
this guy's bringing to the table.
it's
We're getting
12:30.
punchy here, Paul.
It's
12:30.
12:30.
We're getting punchy. Yeah. All right. Well, we shall see. Paul Gronke, great job as always. Honestly, thank you so much. And you didn't exactly shut down my conspiracy theory, but you did put a little damper on it. I appreciate that.
And it's a good
All
thing.
right.